Regulatory steps in South Africa and India move Starlink closer to new markets while Louisiana site talks advance launch options. This is SpaceX Daily, episode 75. SpaceX met with South Africa's Independent Communications Authority for the first time in formal hearings on Starlink licensing. The session addressed spectrum allocation and local ownership rules but produced no immediate approval for service. Direct-to-cell capability remains blocked until full licensing clears. The outcome determines whether Southern Africa joins the growing list of regions with Starlink coverage. While South Africa weighs ownership rules, SpaceX is simultaneously pressing regulators in another major emerging market. SpaceX resubmitted its application to India's regulators for the full second-generation Starlink constellation. The filing covers up to 30,000 satellites and includes updated technical parameters for the expanded network. Approval would allow deployment of the higher-capacity Gen 2 design over Indian territory. The move follows earlier partial approvals that limited satellite numbers. As Starlink pushes for orbital capacity on the ground, new physical launch infrastructure is also advancing. Louisiana Governor Jeff Landry scheduled a public announcement on a new SpaceX launch site agreement in Iberia Parish. The deal follows the recent dismissal of an Exxon coastal lawsuit that had challenged the project. The site would add Gulf Coast capacity beyond existing Texas and Florida pads. Details on pad design and timeline are expected at the event. Local officials had already begun environmental reviews for the project. While new pads are prepared on the ground, an existing Starlink satellite just demonstrated a novel way to observe Starship in orbit. A Starlink satellite captured video of a Starship upper stage during orbital flight. The footage shows the vehicle after separation and before re-entry. Laser links between the satellite and ground stations enabled the downlink. The demonstration highlights an expanding role for the constellation in supporting Starship test documentation. The same laser mesh network that supported that observation is now being discussed in the context of large-scale AI workloads. Memphis Mayor Paul Young called for an open session to address data center power demand and Tennessee Valley Authority rate structures. The meeting would cover how new facilities affect local grids and industrial customers. Olive Branch's new zoning restrictions add another layer of local limits on where such clusters can be sited. Those power and zoning decisions sit alongside the week's regulatory and infrastructure updates that continue to shape Starlink's global footprint. Community discussion on r/SpaceX Lounge points to an expected announcement for a SpaceX facility at Pecan Island, Louisiana. The location sits near the proposed launch site area under discussion with state officials. No official confirmation has issued, but local permitting activity has increased. Australian Space Agency statements confirm ongoing coordination with SpaceX recovery teams for the upper stage located off Christmas Island. Local wildlife photographers documented the vehicle's proximity to shore on August 18th. Court filings show SpaceX seeking to keep open a case involving $1.8 million that left a contractor's account before the firm entered bankruptcy. One thing worth watching is that South Africa's ICASA hearing produced no licensing decision despite SpaceX's first formal participation. The authority continues to require local ownership and spectrum concessions that have delayed service in other markets. Without those approvals, Starlink remains unavailable to South African users. Resolution depends on whether SpaceX accepts the ownership terms or appeals the framework. On the AI front, Mayor Young's call for an open session on data center power demand and TVA rates directly affects planning for large compute clusters in the Memphis region. The discussion centers on how new facilities would draw from existing grid capacity already serving industrial loads. Reports outline internal efforts to tie Starlink capacity and orbital assets to revenue from AI workloads. From an engineering standpoint, the Starlink satellite that recorded video of the Starship upper stage during flight demonstrates how the constellation's inter-satellite laser links can serve as an on-orbit observation network. Each laser terminal must maintain pointing accuracy across hundreds of kilometers while the host satellite moves at orbital velocity. The link budget therefore depends on narrow beam divergence and rapid reacquisition after occlusion. Placing the camera payload on an already operational Starlink satellite avoids the mass and power penalties of dedicated imaging spacecraft, collapsing the marginal cost of the observation to the incremental power draw of the sensor and downlink. The same architecture could later support real-time telemetry relay during re-entry or docking events, once the laser mesh reaches higher density. This approach trades dedicated hardware for reuse of the existing Constellation's communications backbone, a classic first principles substitution of software-defined pointing and routing for additional physical vehicles. The laser link observation method also reveals a practical idiot index calculation for space-based imaging. A purpose-built imaging satellite would require its own propulsion, attitude control, power system, and downlink hardware, multiplying the raw material and energy cost by a factor of 5 to 10 compared with adding a modest sensor to an existing Starlink platform. By contrast, the incremental cost here is dominated by the sensor's silicon and the extra kilowatt hours needed to run the camera and route the data through the laser mesh. That gap shrinks further as laser link density increases, because the marginal energy per additional data stream falls with better routing efficiency. The result is an observation capability whose finished cost sits much closer to the raw inputs of silicon, optics, and electrical power than any standalone spacecraft could achieve. Future extensions of this technique could integrate thermal or spectral sensors to monitor heat shield performance or propellant behavior on the upper stage without adding mass to the test vehicle itself. The physics constraint remains the same. The host satellite's orbital motion and the need for precise beam steering set an upper bound on dwell time and resolution. Yet the economics favor scaling the approach across dozens of Starlink units rather than launching separate assets. Over successive flights, accumulated data from these opportunistic observations could reduce the number of dedicated instrumentation flights required, directly lowering the per-test cost of validating Starship reusability milestones. A quick note on the markets shows the stock moving modestly higher. Before we go, watch for the Louisiana announcement details on pad design that could clarify how the new site fits into overall launch cadence. That's your SpaceX news for today. SPCX is trading at $139.65, up 0.2%. If the show saves you time, a rating or review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify genuinely helps new listeners find it. I'm Patrick in Vancouver. Thanks for listening. See you tomorrow. One more thing. If you like today's episode, our sister show First Principles Daily is worth a spot in your feed. Reasoning from raw materials, not analogy, on the breakthroughs that actually cut cost. It's one of the NARA Network's daily briefings, all free at naranetwork.com. Live dashboards, TSLA, SpaceX launches, the investing scoreboard are all at naranetwork.com data. This episode used AI voice synthesis of my voice. Editorial selection and analysis are my own.